Street culture in the 1980s in the United States was loud, colorful, creative, and constantly evolving. Themselves felt like a stage where fashion, music, cars, and youth culture mixed together in a way the world had never really seen before. Themselves felt like a stage where fashion, music, cars, and youth culture mixed together in a way the world had never really seen before. The 1980s were a time when America was changing quickly, technology was growing, music was exploding into new styles, and young people were shaping their own identity right out in public spaces like sidewalks, parks, basketball courts, and city blocks. A lot of what we today call modern street culture actually started or became famous during that era, and it was influenced by music videos, movies, local communities, and the personalities of the people who lived in those neighborhoods. One of the first things anyone would notice about the streets of America in the 80s was the fashion. Clothing was bold and expressive, and people were not afraid to stand out. Bright colors, oversized jackets, denim everywhere, leather jackets, high-top sneakers, and graphic t-shirts were extremely common. Young people were influenced heavily by pop culture, especially stars like Michael Jackson and Madonna, whose music videos played constantly on MTV, which had launched in 1981 and quickly became one of the biggest influences on fashion trends. Teenagers copied the looks they saw on television, from fingerless gloves and red jackets to big hair, sunglasses, and layered accessories. But street fashion was not only about pop stars, it was also strongly influenced by the rise of hip-hop culture, which began in neighborhoods of New York and then spread across the country. Breakdancers performing on cardboard pieces in public squares, graffiti artists painting colorful murals on subway cars and walls, and DJs playing music on portable boomboxes were common sights in certain areas of big cities. Hip-hop artists like Run DMC helped make streetwear famous, especially Adidas sneakers, tracksuits, and gold chains. And suddenly clothing was not just about looking good, but also about representing your neighborhood, your music taste, and your attitude. Music itself was one of the strongest forces shaping street culture in the 80s. Boomboxes were everywhere, and people carried them on their shoulders, blasting hip-hop, funk, rock, and pop music. You could walk down a block and hear completely different sounds from one corner to the next. One group of kids might be listening to breakbeats, while another group might be playing rock music inspired by bands like Guns N' Roses, who became huge later in the decade. Music was not something people only listened to privately at home. It was shared publicly, loudly, and socially, which created a sense of community on the streets. At the same time, skateboarding was growing rapidly in popularity, especially in California, where young people were transforming empty swimming pools, sidewalks, and parking lots into skate spots. Skate culture added another layer to street life because it mixed rebellion, creativity, and athletic skill. And skateboarders developed their own clothing style, usually loose shirts, worn sneakers, and sometimes punk-influenced fashion. Another big part of 1980s street culture was cars and cruising. In many American cities, teenagers and young adults loved driving around main streets on Friday or Saturday nights just to show off their vehicles, listen to music, and socialize. Cars were a major symbol of identity and freedom. You would see classic American vehicles, customized lowriders, muscle cars from the late 70s still on the road, and newer sporty models that defined the decade. One famous example that symbolized 80s style and speed was the Ford Mustang, produced by Ford Motor Company, which remained extremely popular with young drivers who wanted something fast but also affordable. Street racing existed in some areas, especially in parts of Los Angeles, where long straight roads made it tempting for drivers to test their cars late at night, although it was illegal and often attracted police attention. But cruising itself was more about being seen, meeting friends, and experiencing the nightlife of the city without necessarily going inside clubs or bars. Basketball courts also played a huge role in street culture during the 80s. Outdoor courts in neighborhoods were gathering places where people played pickup games, watched talented players show off their skills, and spent entire evenings socializing. Basketball fashion became part of everyday style too, with athletic shorts, sneakers, and jerseys becoming normal street clothing rather than just sportswear. Around this time, players like Michael Jordan began rising to fame, and his influence made basketball culture even more powerful among young Americans. Sneakers in particular became an important symbol of status and identity, something that still continues today. The streets of the 80s were also deeply connected to art, especially graffiti, which was controversial, but incredibly creative. Many city governments considered graffiti vandalism and tried to remove it, but artists saw it as a way to express themselves and claim space in the city. Subway trains in New York became moving art galleries covered in colorful letters and designs that represented crews or artists' names. Even though authorities tried to clean the trains, the style and creativity of graffiti from that time eventually influenced modern design, advertising, and street art around the world. Movies also helped shape how people saw street culture in the 1980s. Films like Break-In and Beat Street showed breakdancing, DJ battles, and graffiti culture to audiences everywhere, and many teenagers started practicing dance moves on sidewalks and in parks after watching them. Hollywood unintentionally helped spread urban street culture from specific neighborhoods to the entire country and eventually internationally. Another interesting truth about street life in the 80s is that it felt more local and personal than today's internet-driven culture. Trends often started in one neighborhood and slowly spread through music, magazines, television, and word of mouth rather than social media. People actually gathered physically outside much more often because entertainment options at home were limited compared to today. Video games existed, but were still growing, and many kids preferred arcades, which were also social spaces filled with neon lights, loud music, and competition. Safety and crime were also part of the reality of street culture in some cities during the 1980s. Certain neighborhoods struggled with higher crime rates and economic problems, especially in big urban areas. However, at the same time, those same neighborhoods produced incredibly influential music, art, and cultural movements that shaped the entire world. That contrast between challenges and creativity is one of the reasons the 1980s remain so fascinating to talk about today. What makes the street culture of that decade truly special is that it felt raw and original. People were inventing new styles without realizing that decades later, the world would look back at the 80s as one of the most iconic cultural periods in American history. Fashion trends from that era continue to return. Music from the decade still plays everywhere, and the influence of early hip-hop, skateboarding, graffiti, and street fashion is visible in modern culture across the globe. When people imagine the 1980s streets of America, they often picture neon lights reflecting on wet sidewalks after rain, music echoing from boomboxes, groups of friends laughing on street corners, customized cars slowly cruising past, and dancers spinning on cardboard under streetlights. And while not every moment was glamorous or perfect, the energy of that era was very real. It was a time when the streets themselves became a creative space where young people shaped trends, expressed themselves freely, and unknowingly created the foundation for much of the global youth culture we recognize today.